Breaking news, House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries says he met with President Biden privately last night. In a letter to his colleagues in Congress, Jeffries says he, quote, directly expressed the full breadth of insight, heartfelt perspectives, and conclusions about the path forward that the caucus shared. Meanwhile, another House Democrat has just come forward as at least 18 Democratic lawmakers are now publicly calling for President Biden to step aside. Let's bring in senior reporter Catherine Faulders and White House correspondent Mary Alice Parks for more. Catherine, what more can you tell us about this meeting between Hakeem Jeffries and the president and what this path is that he's referring to in this letter?
Well, look, this is a typical Jeffries speak in some sense. It is farther than he's gone, at least so far, based on his public comments. But what he's saying is that he met with Biden privately, and he expressed how his caucus is feeling. We know that they've been having meetings behind closed doors on Capitol Hill, and you just mentioned an 18th Democratic lawmaker coming out and saying Biden should step aside. But what's interesting about this letter is Jeffries does not say if he told Biden to remain in the race or drop out. He leaves that portion out of it. But what he says is that the discourse that House Democrats have been having behind the scenes, he writes, has been candid, clear-eyed, and comprehensive. This is what he was saying. At least he conveyed that to the president in their meeting on Thursday. So we'll have to see how this progresses. But to your point about the 18th member of Congress coming out and saying Biden should step aside, I should note that's still a small number of the Democratic caucus, but it's surely something that Jeffries is continuing to field concerns on. And this number is very likely to grow over the course of the coming days.
Mary Alice, President Biden dismissed lawmakers' concerns in his press conference last night, but more have now come forward, to Catherine's point, calling on him to step aside. So how's the White House managing these concerns and the momentum, the direction in which this is moving right now?
Yeah, so far it has been a drip, drip, drip. There hasn't been a flood of members. To Catherine's point, we are still talking about a small fraction of elected Democratic officials. And that's been the message from the White House. And they've gone as far as to mock some of these members as being low-ranking, more junior members. And you heard the president himself last night say that it's not uncommon for members to be anxious, especially those in tight races. Of course, if this number grows, if it becomes a deafening sound, a huge flood, it will be incredibly hard for the president to dismiss. He is an incumbent president. He has to have his party with him. Remember that these elected members of Congress are often superdelegates themselves. They play a major role in fundraising for the party, in getting voters out, and they don't want to put their own races in jeopardy. And many have expressed to us a real anxiety that Biden at the top of the ticket could be a drag on the Democratic ticket as a whole. So to Catherine's point, I think we're in a wait-and-see mode. Wait and see if more elected members of Congress join this chorus, if that becomes real loud, and also who exactly is on that list. There are definitely some members of Congress that the president has a closer relationship with, who in theory could be different messengers, not only those in leadership like you would expect, but even some in the Senate who is personally close with. So I think that if some of those members start to talk very personally and honestly and likely privately with the president about their concerns, it could change things. Until then, we heard the president yesterday say that he was adamant about staying in.
Catherine, what about Biden's press conference yesterday? Did that help to ease any concern, make them worse? Neither?
Well, look, I think a little bit of both. You've seen criticisms on some sides. You say, well, look, he did mix up Trump when he referred to Vice President Trump and not Kamala Harris. At the same time, he was great on foreign policy. These are all sorts of things that you're hearing and seeing out there in the ether. But I think the reality is that some are still saying privately behind the scenes that, look, this could be one decent press conference, but if this is the conversation we're continuing to have, that's not healthy. You saw Democrat Chris Himes say the same similar thing yesterday when he came out and asked for Biden to step aside following that press conference. So I think the reality of all of this is that the spotlight is on President Biden with every public appearance that he does, and just will remain a part of the conversation. Of course, something that the Republicans have tried to capitalize on, including former President Trump, who has just remained silent, hasn't really done any of his own campaign events. He's been behind the scenes, so taking advantage of that in some ways. But at least the growing number of Democrats on Capitol Hill doesn't really seem to have slowed down at all in terms of them coming to tell him to step aside. But I do think it's important to note that that's still a small percentage of the Democratic caucus.
Mary Alice, how are the White House and the Biden campaign reacting to last night's press conference. What are they saying, and what are you hearing about what's happening behind closed doors now?
I mean, look, they've been celebrating it, as you can imagine. They were very talkative last night. I was getting many texts from the campaign and the White House sort of celebrating what they saw was a strong performance from the president. One aide texted me, he absolutely crushed it. Another said, for a doddering elderly man, he looks like he has a pretty good command, actually an incredible command of foreign policy. They were glad that he got some really tough and complicated questions on foreign policy. For better or for worse, I mean, let's be honest, they know that what is at stake here is proving to Americans that he is still in command of this job, that he is making tough decisions there in the Oval Office. So I think they felt good about the fact that he was talking in the weeds, in depth, about China, about Gaza, about Russia. I think that it's their job to sort of look forward to the next day. And the staff members, I will tell you, that we are talking to most often are also very aware that this big picture decision about whether or not he's going to stay in the race is such a private one, and one that he is making in council with an increasingly small group of advisors, his family, his closest senior aides that have been with him for decades. And so even pretty senior members of the White House staff, the campaign staff, are aware that that question is still ultimately a very private one, and unless he makes any different decision, they are full steam ahead.
A private decision with very public consequences, Mary Alice. Catherine, let's talk about the polling here now, because this new poll is showing former President Trump with a 3-point lead over Biden. How significant is that?
It's a slight lead. It's a little outside the margin of error, 3-point lead. And it also found that Biden is seen as not as mentally sharp as Trump. Look, I think we'll start seeing a lot more of these polls come out. They'll probably differ, for example, after the press conference. I'm curious to see the polling around Biden after that. Of course, after the convention around Trump. Let's see how that goes. But at least that one poll that you're speaking about, that Pew poll, did show Trump with a slight lead over Biden. And we do know that we've been reporting that at least the internal polling of the Biden campaign is that they are polling what a head-to-head matchup could potentially look like between Harris and Trump. Now, of course, I wouldn't read too much into that. It can go either way, but at least internally inside the Biden campaign, they are considering that type of polling as well, Diane.
Mary Alice Parks, Catherine Falders, thank you. And we will have special coverage of the Republican National Convention starting Monday at 9 p.m. Eastern right here on ABC News Live.